The first time I saw Sandra Vickley marching up my driveway in her bright pink blazer and matching clipboard, I should have turned around and gone back inside. I knew that look. The tight jaw, the pursed lips, the way she eyeballed my new wrought iron gate like it had insulted her personally. But I stayed, and I regretted it about 20 seconds later. "You can't just install a gate without HOA approval, Everett," she said, tapping her pen against her clipboard like a metronome of doom. "It's a violation of Section 6, Subclause B. I have a permit," I cut in, pointing to the laminated copy zip tied right to the gate post. "Approved by the city. Got it 2 weeks ago, fully up to code." "That doesn't matter," she snapped. "You didn't get our approval. The HOA Architectural Committee has specific aesthetic standards, and this gate doesn't fit." "It's a black iron gate," I said, folding my arms. "It looks exactly like the one at your house." Sandra's eyes twitched. "Mine was approved." "Yeah, by you." That earned me a stiff pause, then she scribbled something on her clipboard with enough force to almost tear the page. Without another word, she spun on her heel and marched off, heels clacking like gunshots across my concrete. Now I thought that would be the end of it. But 2 days later I got a letter taped to my mailbox, not mailed taped, real professional. "Gate must be removed within 10 days. Failure to comply will result in fines of $100 per day retroactively applied." I laughed. Then I called the city. They confirmed my permit was valid and told me any further issues were between me and the HOA. So I went to the next board meeting just to nip this in the bud. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse. Cheap folding chairs, stale cookies, and a bunch of retirees pretending they were city council. Sandra sat at the head like she was running a courtroom. I stood up and laid out my case permit, code compliance, legal documentation. I even brought photos of the gate from multiple angles, including hers. "Mr. Langley," she said, her voice syrupy sweet, "the HOA reserves the right to enforce neighborhood standards beyond the city's minimum requirements. That gate is a disruption to our community's visual harmony." "Visual harmony," I raised an eyebrow. "So your gate is harmonious, but mine's a problem?" Sandra didn't answer. She just nodded to the other board members, 3 of her retired golf buddies who didn't say a word except to vote with her. Motion passed. Gates must be removed. I left that meeting boiling. But I wasn't about to let a clipboard queen push me around. I dug into the HOA bylaws, read every page. And that's when I found it. The private access road behind our houses, the one the HOA used for golf cart patrols, maintenance trucks, and Sandra's precious shortcut, it ran through a 10-foot wide strip of my land. And guess what? The HOA never filed the easement paperwork. So I did what any rational, fed-up homeowner would do. The next morning, I parked my old Ford F-150 sideways across the access road. Threw a couple of orange cones in front of it for good measure. Hung a laminated sign on the mirror, "Road closed due to HOA permit violation. Access restricted pending resolution of property use fees." 30 minutes later, Sandra was at my front door. "This is illegal," she shouted, cheeks redder than her blazer. "So was your fine," I said, sipping my coffee. "You want access to my land, you'll need to pay the permit fees." "I'm charging the same rates you threatened me with, $100 a day, retroactively." She gawked like I'd slapped her with a fish. "You're bluffing." I pointed to a copy of the property plat I'd nailed to a post beside the truck. "City records don't lie, your road." "My land." Sandra stormed off again, this time with less clack and more stomp, and that's when the fun really began. The day after I blocked the access road, a clipboard wasn't enough for Sandra anymore. This time, she showed up with a man in a beige suit who introduced himself as legal counsel for the HOA. He didn't offer a name, just a card with a fax number on it and a firm handshake that felt more like a challenge. "This is a serious matter, Mr. Langley," he said, adjusting his cufflink like he was preparing for a courtroom brawl. "The HOA maintains a long-standing usage of that road. Your actions are obstructive and could be considered interference with community operations. I leaned against the truck door and crossed my arms. You might want to look up the term prescriptive easement before you start throwing legal terms around. You need continuous, open, and hostile use for over 10 years. You've got none of that. I've only lived here 6, and I've been maintaining that strip myself since day 1. Sandra's lawyer glanced at her, eyebrows twitching just slightly. She didn't look pleased by the reminder. There's precedent for implied easement in some jurisdictions, he said, but there was hesitation now. We'd prefer to resolve this amicably. Great, I said, nodding. I'll draft a license agreement. Temporary use, renewable every 6 months. You pay market rate, I won't tow any golf carts. Sandra's mouth opened like she was about to explode, but the lawyer cut in before she could. We'll get back to you. They left without further threats, which told me I'd hit a nerve. I didn't waste time. I contacted a real estate attorney and had the agreement drawn up within 48 hours. I set the usage fee at a conservative rate based on similar residential access agreements in the county. Nothing outrageous, just enough to make a point. By then, word had spread. Neighbors started stopping by while I was working on the hedges or hauling mulch. Some came to gossip, others to ask questions. A few even brought fresh baked cookies, which I took as a sign I wasn't the only one tired of Sandra's reign. One of them, an older guy named Larry who lived 3 houses down, leaned on the gate post and said, "You know, she tried that same gate nonsense on me 6 years ago. Said my mailbox was half an inch too tall. I had to pay a fine just to shut her up." "Did you ever check if the fine was legal?" I asked. Larry scratched his chin. "Didn't think to, didn't want the hassle. That got me thinking." I spent the next 3 evenings combing through HOA meeting minutes, past newsletters, and city code logs. I found discrepancies, a lot of them. Sandra had been issuing fines under ordinances that didn't exist, quoting outdated regulations, and in one case citing a rule that had been repealed 5 years ago, and she kept records. Meticulous ones. Tucked into the HOA's public filing cabinet at the clubhouse were scanned PDFs and photocopied letters with handwritten notes in the margins. Her handwriting. Cross-referencing them with city records, I found at least 8 fines that had 0 legal standing. I compiled everything: dates, violations, amounts, and city code references, and drafted a formal complaint to the county's Department of Regulatory Affairs. I submitted the whole packet with notarized copies. While I waited for their response, things escalated. A week later, without warning, someone slashed the rear tires on my truck. I reported it immediately. The sheriff's deputy was polite but skeptical. No cameras, no witnesses, no immediate suspects, but I wasn't unprepared. I installed a motion-activated, infrared security camera the same day, tucking it discreetly beneath the gutter overhang with a clear view of the access road and my driveway. 2 nights later, it caught something. At exactly 3 a.m., a shadowy figure crept along the hedge line and tried to pry open my side gate using what looked like a crowbar. They gave up after a minute and disappeared back down the access road. I turned the footage over to the sheriff's office the next morning. This time, they took it seriously. That afternoon, a patrol car cruised the neighborhood. A deputy knocked on Sandra's door. She wasn't home, but the tension around the cul-de-sac was thick enough to chew. The following morning, HOA board member George Carpenter, retired dentist, generally harmless, showed up on my porch. He looked like he hadn't slept. "Everett," he said, eyes darting like he expected someone to jump out of the bushes. "We need to talk." I invited him in. He brought a manila envelope with him. "I don't know everything Sandra's been doing," he said, setting it on the counter, "but I found these in the file cabinet. She never shared them at meetings." Inside were copies of letters from the city dating back 3 years, warnings. Notices of noncompliance. One letter, dated from 18 months ago, outright stated that the HOA had no authority to issue certain fines without a formal amendment to the bylaws, a step Sandra had never taken. She's been hiding them, George said, and forging meeting minutes. Look at this one says we voted to approve new landscaping restrictions last spring. I was on vacation during that meeting. Nothing like that ever came up. I scanned the signatures. They were all in the same handwriting, all Sandra. You realize what this means? I asked. George nodded slowly. If the state gets wind of this, the HOA could be dissolved. I already sent in a formal complaint, I said. But this is gasoline on the fire. George looked relieved and terrified all at once. If you need someone to back you up, I'll speak. I'm done covering for her. The next day, the Department of Regulatory Affairs called me back. They'd reviewed my report and were opening an investigation. They also advised me to forward the evidence of tampered records to the district attorney's office, which I did. 2 days later, Sandra tried one last maneuver. She held an emergency HOA meeting. I showed up early, sat in the front row, and watched her try to explain away the blocked road, the missing records, and the misunderstandings about gate permits. She even tried to claim the forged signatures were draft copies she had created just in case of emergency. I waited until she was done, stood up, and handed copies of the real evidence to every board member present. The room went dead silent as they flipped through page after page of Proof City letters, fake minutes, illegitimate fines. George stood up and said, I move to suspend Sandra Vickley from all HOA duties pending external investigation. The vote passed without a single dissent. Sandra stood there frozen, face pale, hands clenched tight around her pink pen. Then she turned and stormed out of the building, not a word spoken. Outside, I took down the road closed sign from my truck. I left the cones, though, just for the symbolism. A week later, the sheriff's department filed charges tampering with public records, fraud, and potential mail fraud, depending on how many fake notices were actually sent. The HOA board, now under interim leadership, voted to nullify every fine issued under Sandra's presidency and refund those who had paid. Turns out, that gate wasn't a violation. It was a wake-up call. 3 weeks after Sandra's suspension, the neighborhood had never felt more alive. Lawns were being mowed with extra enthusiasm. Front porches saw spontaneous gatherings, and the community message board, once a battlefield of passive-aggressive flair, had been wiped clean of HOA-issued notices. Residents were suddenly remembering how to smile again, but the storm wasn't over. Late one morning, I was in the garage organizing tools when a knock came at the side door. It was Deputy Kessler, the same officer who had taken my statement about the tire slashing. His cruiser was idling out front, lights off, but engine running. We're going to need a formal statement from you, he said, glancing over his shoulder. DA's office is building something bigger than we expected. There's more than just forged documents. I set my wrench tray down. How much more? He leaned in slightly, voice hushed. We got a tip from someone inside the HOA. Said funds were being redirected, maintenance budgets approved but never spent, landscaping invoices submitted for work that never happened. Thousands missing. Maybe tens of thousands. I motioned him inside and pulled out the folder I'd been using to track the gate incident. You'll want these too. I kept records of every notice she ever delivered to me, dates, signatures, everything. Might help you connect the dots. Kessler took the folder carefully. You've been busy. Just didn't like being lied to, I said, shutting the door behind him as he left. That afternoon, I called George. He'd been appointed interim president of the HOA and was clearly in over his head, but to his credit, he wasn't hiding. When I asked if he had any idea about the missing funds, there was a long pause on the line. I didn't know it was that bad, he finally said. I noticed a few strange entries in last year's financial report, duplicate payments, vague descriptions like contingency expenses, but I thought maybe it was just sloppy bookkeeping. Did Sandra handle the finances herself? I asked. She and the treasurer, Judy Clemens. But Judy moved away in the spring. Sandra said she took over everything temporarily. I'd suggest you get some forensic accounting help, I said, Before the feds beat you to it, George exhaled heavily. I'll call a CPA. 2 days later, the neighborhood buzzed with the arrival of a city inspector and 2 plainclothes investigators from the district attorney's office. They showed up at the clubhouse and spent over 4 hours combing the records room. Word got around fast someone had seen them loading boxes into the back of a black SUV. That night, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. "Mr. Langley," said a woman on the other end. "This is Elise Tran with the district attorney's office. I'd like to speak with you in person. Tomorrow morning, if you're available." They met me at the public library in a quiet study room tucked away from the main floor. Elise was sharp-eyed, mid-30s, and didn't waste time. "We've confirmed that Sandra Vickley used a series of shell landscaping companies to launder HOA funds," she said, flipping through a stack of documents. "She funneled over $48,000 into these entities over the past 2 years. Every invoice was signed by her. Some included inflated costs for work that was never performed." "She run the companies herself?" I asked. "No," Elise said. "She used a former acquaintance ex-boyfriend from what we can tell. He registered the businesses under his name. We're tracking his location now." I leaned back, stunned. "So she was bleeding the HOA dry and fining people for their porch lights." Elise didn't smile. "That's not all. We believe she sent out fraudulent violation letters to generate confusion and discourage members from attending meetings. By keeping people overwhelmed with bogus fines, she maintained control. And now, she's facing wire fraud, mail fraud, and misuse of public funds, possibly conspiracy to defraud. The sheriff's department is preparing a warrant. We expect to arrest her by the weekend." When I got home, I found a manila envelope tucked under my doormat. No return address, just my name typed across the front. Inside was a single flash drive. I ran it on my laptop, using a sandbox environment just in case. It contained a folder labeled HOA Confidential, and inside were dozens of scanned documents, emails between Sandra and her so-called treasurer, bank statements from the fake landscaping companies, and one audio file. I clicked play. Sandra's voice came through, clear and composed. "If we spread the invoices across different categories, miscellaneous, seasonal projects, emergency repairs, no one's going to ask questions. George barely reads the reports, and if anyone complains, we can just hit them with a violation. Most people fold." I copied the entire folder to a secure drive and delivered the original to Elise the next morning. She looked at me like I just handed her a golden ticket. "That audio will crack the whole case open," she said. "We'll subpoena the HOA's bank account records and start matching dates." By Friday afternoon, Sandra was arrested at her home. Someone caught the whole thing on their doorbell camera, the unmarked car pulling up, the knock at the door, her coming out in a gray hoodie, hands cuffed behind her back. The video hit the neighborhood group chat within an hour. Comments exploded. By Monday, the entire HOA board had resigned, except for George. He issued a letter announcing a temporary freeze on all enforcement actions and called for an emergency election to rebuild the board from scratch. I wasn't planning to run, but then something unexpected happened. A group of neighbors, people I barely knew before all this came to my house that evening. They brought a petition, signed by over 60 homeowners, asking me to run for HOA president. "You're the only one who stood up to her," said a nurse named Trina from 4 houses down. "You read the bylaws, you knew your rights. We need someone like that." I didn't answer right away. I spent the night walking the property line behind my house, staring at the truck still parked across the access road. It had become more than a blockade, it was a symbol. A reminder that authority without accountability was just bullying in a blazer. The next morning, I dropped off my candidacy form with George. The election was set for the following Saturday. By the time the votes were counted, it wasn't even close. At the first board meeting under the new leadership, we passed 3 resolutions. First, All HOA finances would be managed by an independent firm and reviewed quarterly by an outside auditor. No exceptions. Second, no enforcement actions could be taken without a majority vote and documented legal basis cited in writing. Third, the access road behind our homes was to be formally licensed for HOA use, but only under mutually agreed terms. And the license fee, a single $1 per year, renewable every January. Symbolic, just enough to remind them who owned the land. As I signed the final resolution into record, George leaned over to me and whispered, "Feels like the neighborhood finally woke up." I nodded. Took a gate to do it. The truck stayed parked there for another week, cones and all. Then one morning, I moved it back into the garage and planted a patch of wildflowers across the edge of the road. Just enough to mark the boundary, and from that day forward, no one tried to cross it without asking. By the second month of my term as HOA president, the clubhouse smelled less like stale coffee and more like fresh paint. We'd gutted the place, not just the interior, but everything it represented. No more secret meetings, no more fines handed out like Halloween candy. The locks had been changed, the bylaws updated, and the community bulletin board now featured block party flyers instead of violation notices. But we weren't done cleaning up yet. The forensic audit we'd commissioned uncovered something worse than anyone expected: a second bank account. It had been opened under the HOA's name, but registered to a P.O. box in a neighboring town. Transactions showed regular deposits from HOA dues, tens of thousands over the last year, and matching withdrawals to a personal checking account under the name of Judy Clemens, the former treasurer who had supposedly moved out of state. I called Elise Tran at the DA's office the moment I saw the report. "That's embezzlement on a much larger scale than we suspected," she said, flipping through the audit during our follow-up meeting at the county building. "Judy's disappearance wasn't a coincidence. We believe she's in Florida, hiding under a different last name." "Do you have jurisdiction there?" I asked. "If we can get the state attorney to cooperate, yes," Elise replied. "We're drafting an extradition request." And if Sandra had any knowledge of this, and based on her email chain, she'll be facing additional charges. I didn't say anything for a moment. I was staring at one of the scanned documents, an HOA payment ledger with a single-line item labeled Consulting Retainer. The amount, $12,000. The recipient, an LLC registered under Sandra's maiden name. "How did no one catch this before?" I finally asked. Elise sighed. "Because no one looked. Until you." Back in the neighborhood, word was spreading again, only this time it wasn't paranoia, it was purpose. For the first time, residents were showing up to meetings voluntarily. People who hadn't said a word in years were now bringing proposals for dog parks, community gardens, even a small lending library near the clubhouse. At the next meeting, we voted to suspend all dues collections until the end of the fiscal year. We had enough in reserves, real reserves, now that the books were clean and it was time to rebuild trust. After the vote, I stayed behind to lock up. George walked over holding a small wooden box. "Found this in the storage closet," he said. "Thought you might want to see it." Inside were old HOA newsletters dating back over a decade. One showed a picture of the clubhouse's ribbon cutting with a much younger Sandra holding the ceremonial scissors. She was smiling genuinely. "She helped build this place," I said quietly. "She also burned it down," George replied. 2 weeks later, the arrest warrant for Judy went through. She was picked up outside a strip mall in Daytona Beach, caught using a fake ID while trying to cash a money order. Florida authorities held her long enough for Elise's team to fly in and bring her back in cuffs. Her mugshot made the local paper back home. Under questioning, Judy didn't deny the embezzlement. She blamed Sandra. Claimed she only went along because Sandra promised to fix everything before anyone noticed. She even provided access to encrypted files on an old hard drive files that included HOA emails, scan checks, and one particularly damning audio memo where Sandra coached her on how to scrub the financial reports. That was enough for the DA to upgrade Sandra's charges to include conspiracy to defraud and obstruction of justice. Her trial was scheduled for the coming spring. Meanwhile, the HOA board continued rebuilding from the ground up. We opened the books to the entire community literally. A copy of every monthly financial statement was now posted on the bulletin board and emailed to each homeowner. But the real shift happened during the first community-wide vote under the new bylaws. We proposed a resolution that would permanently separate enforcement authority from the board itself. Instead, a rotating committee of 3 elected residents with no ties to board members would review any proposed enforcement actions. And all complaints had to be submitted in writing with evidence. No anonymous tattletales, no clipboard crusaders. The resolution passed with over 90% approval. That night, I walked the neighborhood just like I had the night before I agreed to run. Only this time I wasn't being watched. Porch lights were on, kids were riding bikes in the cul-de-sac, and someone was grilling in their backyard. The tension that used to choke the air had lifted. I stopped by the access road at the rear of the neighborhood, the one that started it all. The wildflowers I'd planted had taken root, and now a small wooden sign sat next to them, hand-painted by one of the kids on the street. It read, "Private road, respect the boundaries." The message wasn't just about property lines anymore. Days later, I got a letter. Not from the city, not from the DA, this one was handwritten, folded neatly, and left in my mailbox with no stamp. It was from Larry, the guy who once told me about his mailbox being too tall. "You reminded us what this neighborhood was supposed to be," he wrote. "Thanks for fighting when the rest of us were too tired." I kept that letter in the same drawer as the original gate permit, the one that Sandra claimed didn't matter. It had mattered. It had started everything. Sandra eventually took a plea deal. 5 years probation, a suspended sentence, and full restitution of misappropriated funds, just over $72,000. Judy got 2 years, with eligibility for release after 12 months if she cooperated fully. Neither of them would ever serve on a board again. As for the HOA, it became something new, not a homeowner's adversary, but their ally. We hosted our first community BBQ that summer. No speeches, no rules. Just food, music, and neighbors learning how to talk to each other again. Even the gate stayed up. No one questioned it anymore. And no one else ever walked up my driveway with a clipboard.